All right, everybody. Hope you're having a good evening or day, depending on when you're watching this. I wanted to go through the beginning of our presentation about the executive branch with some of the basic information. A few of the things in here we're going to discuss in class, but I wanted to go through at least the first half of it at home. As you're listening to this, if you have questions, please write them down. We'll have plenty of time in class on Thursday to go over this if you end up having any questions. So make sure you come in with any that you might have. Some of the basic information about the executive branch. Uh, the executive branch of government is the branch that enforces the laws. One of the ways that you can remember that, remember when we did legislative branch, legislative makes, executive branch, E in executive, and E in enforces. The job of the executive branch is to make sure that the laws passed by the legislative branch are carried out. So E in executive and E in enforces is how you would remember that. The head of the executive branch for the U.S. Government is the President of the United States. Obviously, the different levels of government that we've talked about, state government, local government, also have executives, whether it be the governor of your state, the mayor of your city, etc. Usually, when we think of a building for the executive branch, we think of the White House. That's where the president lives. But there are lots of executive branch buildings all over the country. And as we saw when we were in D.C., most of D.C. are office buildings for the different departments of the government, like the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, and all of those are part of the executive branch as well. The people who are the president's closest advisors are his or her cabinet. This is a term that was started way back in the early administrations of the country, but the cabinet are the people that run the different departments of the government for the president. So the president would pick the person to be the head of the Department of State, the head of the Department of Justice, the head of the Department of Treasury. It's about 18 different cabinet positions, and all of those people help the president run the different parts of the government. Something to think about is, we came out of a country under Great Britain where we had a very powerful monarch, George III. That's a picture of George III there on the right side of your screen. How did this influence the creation of our presidency? If you think about under the Articles of Confederation, there was no president at all. If you think about the early stages of our government, our president was designed to be sort of on the weak side. Most of the power was given to Congress, as you'll see when we talk about the separation of powers. There weren't a ton of powers given to the president to limit the power of the other two branches. Many, many more powers were given to Congress. Over time, our president has become a significantly more powerful figure, and we'll be spending some time in class talking about exactly that issue. But just think about sort of the history of the executive in the United States, how we've gone from a very powerful king to no executive at all under the Articles of Confederation, to slowly throughout our country's history a more powerful president as the country's history has gone on. A few details about the president. In order to be president of the United States, the Constitution says you must be 35 years old. Our youngest president was John F. Kennedy, but most of our presidents have been well out of their 30s, and that hasn't been any sort of issue, especially recently. In order to be president of the United States, you must be a natural-born citizen. Exactly what it means to be a natural-born citizen is not 100% clear. Most people think it means that at the moment of your birth, you were a citizen of the United States. There are two ways to be a natural-born citizen. You can be born inside the boundaries of the United States of America, or one or both of your parents could be American citizens. So if my parents were American citizens, but they happened to be living in Europe when I was born, I would still be a natural-born citizen. If my parents were from a different country and they happened to have me as a child while I was in the boundaries of the United States, that would make me a natural-born citizen as well. The reason that we have a picture here of former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, is that even though he was the governor of the largest state in the United States, he can never be president because at the moment of his birth, he was born in Austria and didn't come to the United States until he was in his 20s. That means that he's not eligible to ever be president. Only people who were natural-born citizens can become president. This has been a really controversial topic, and there are some people who say we should get rid of this and allow people who became citizens later in life to be president. But at the moment, this is what the Constitution says until we amend it. For most of the country's history up until about the 1940s, there were no rules about the number of terms that a president could serve. A term for the president is 4 years, so every 4 years we elect a president. And prior to the 1940s, presidents could run for as many terms as they wanted. George Washington had set the standard that most people did not run for more than 2 terms, but there was no rule that you could not run for more than 2 terms. Franklin Roosevelt, during the Great Depression and World War II, was elected to 4 terms. He died early on in his 4th term, so ended up serving only about 13 years as president. But after that happened, they amended the Constitution to limit the number of terms that a president could serve to 2 terms. Those terms don't have to be consecutive, so I could be elected to a 4-year term, leave the presidency, come back and be elected to a different 4-year term, but the maximum number of terms that a president can now serve in his lifetime is 2. And that was by amendment to the Constitution in the 1950s. The next 5 slides are going to go through the 5 jobs of the modern president. There are many more jobs than this, but these are sort of the 5 big responsibilities that the president has at any given time. And you'll need to know these. So each slide does a different job. Make sure you understand what the 5 jobs are. The first job of the modern president is to be the commander-in-chief of the military. This is a really important job because the president of the United States is the one who makes all decisions about the military in terms of when to, how to use the military in certain circumstances. All of the generals in the different branches of the military answer to the president, and the president, although war is declared by Congress, the president decides how to use the military if we are in a declared war. This is important because in the United States we have something called civilian control over the military. If you think about countries that are dictatorships, things that'll come to your mind are like Nazi Germany, maybe Cuba, North Korea. One of the things you'll notice is in those countries, the leader of the country, the dictator, oftentimes wears a military uniform. In those countries, there is no civilian control, meaning civilians are people who are not in the military. There is no civilian control over the military. That means that the leader of the country is also the leader of the military, and there's no blend. There is no blend between the two. This is important because in the United States, if we don't like what the military is doing, we can elect a new leader of the military. Essentially, electing a new president would cause a change in how the military behaves. Not most other countries have that kind of a setup. And it's something that's made the U.S. a very unique place because we've never had the military take over our country when things were not going well. Egypt just experienced this not very long ago. Many new democracies do, but the United States never has because the president who we elect is the commander-in-chief of our military. The second job of the modern president is to propose laws. Notice I didn't say to make laws, because that would be the job of Congress. And as we learned when we discussed how a bill becomes a law, the president can't even introduce laws himself or herself into Congress. The president can propose new ideas for things that should be turned into law and can go to Congress and get members of Congress, usually of his or her own party, to recommend them. But the president can't necessarily on his own get laws passed. Okay? What the president can do is use pressure to get members of Congress to vote the way he wants them to vote. We call this using the bully pulpit. You're probably pretty comfortable with the term bully. A pulpit is a place in a church or a synagogue or a mosque where the religious leader would deliver a sermon or a speech. The bully pulpit is the idea that the president can use his or her power to get members of Congress to do what he or she wants. This could work in a number of ways. The president could call members of Congress and say, if you vote the way I would like you on this particular piece of legislation, I'll support you in something else that you want. Maybe it means that the president will agree to raise money for the member of Congress when they're running for re-election. Maybe it means that the president will promise to help give the member of Congress something else that they want in exchange. But the president has a lot of popularity, can pressure members of Congress to, and because the media pays so much attention to the president, they can pressure members of Congress to vote the way that they want. We call this using the bully pulpit. The third job of the modern president, and we've sort of talked about this already when we discussed the powers of the Senate, the president is the chief of personnel. There are literally thousands of jobs. high-level jobs in the government, to be a judge in the federal court, to be a cabinet official, the head of any number of agencies that the government has created over the course of its history, to be the ambassador to any country that the United States has a foreign policy with. All of those people are appointed by the president. So when a position like that becomes vacant because someone has retired or moved on to a different job, the president is constantly picking people to fill these positions. That requires a lot of a lot of work on the part of his staff to like find qualified candidates. But it also it's a constant thing that all presidents are doing. And because the president can't make all of the decisions for the government on his own, he uses the people that he appoints to run these different agencies and bureaus and beyond the federal courts to help spread his message and his ideas. And that would happen as the chief of personnel. The fourth job of the modern president is to be the head of state. When people think of the United States, they think of the president first. That's the image that comes into their mind. And as a result, the president's job is to represent our country in any number of official capacities, right? So the president is the one who makes our foreign policy. When world leaders come to the United States, they come and talk to the president of the United States. And when our president goes to other countries, he talks or she talks with world leaders from overseas. The president also represents us at formal ceremonies. So things like the Olympics, events like the lighting of the national menorah or the national Christmas tree when we get to the winter holidays. As this picture shows you here, this is a picture of Bill Clinton from during his presidency when they were having a state dinner when the premier of China and his wife had come to visit. This is an example of a formal ceremony that the government has that the president is the one who is responsible for representing our country and giving toasts and giving speeches and things like that. When major world leaders die, like when the Pope died, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the president goes and represents the United States at those kind of functions. So these are really important things where the world is looking at America and the president is the one who's the face for all of those relationships. The final job of the modern president is to be the head of his or her political party. And obviously this varies depending on who the president is, but currently President Obama is not only is a Democrat, but he's the head of the Democratic Party. Whatever policies President Obama decides to carry out, most other Democrats follow them because he is the leader of their party. At the moment, because there is not a Republican president, it's much harder to answer the question who's the leader of the Republican Party. Many Republicans would, say maybe John Boehner or maybe Mitt Romney or maybe a bunch of other Republicans like maybe Ted Cruz. There's no one clear leader, but when your party controls the presidency, there is one clear leader. And that can be very helpful to your political party. It can help to raise money and get more high-profile support for your party's ideas. And that can be very effective in helping to win elections. So President Obama plays a major role in helping to get his political party, the Democratic Party, more support and get their ideas carried out into law. These are just a few of the things that the presidency does. And the rest of this PowerPoint, we'll spend some time later in the week going over and talking about especially the process for how we elect our president, which is something that causes people a lot of confusion. Remember, if you have any questions about any of the things we talked about, please come with them to class and we'll discuss them as a group. Thank you.